Elise Morvan kicked the bulkhead, and it groaned like an old man getting out of bed. She'd always believed machinery had souls, and the sleeper ship Archean was that grumpy uncle who'd rather nap than deal with family drama. For the love of rust and grease, wake up, you useless hunk of metal, she muttered. The Archean was parked, it would be generous to say, landed, in the Martian quarantine zone, which was less, red planet, and more, rusty, perpetually under construction parking lot. The quarantine zone was where dreams and dust went to die together, a fitting place for humanity's latest interstellar venture to make its debut. A cacophony of alien chatter floated in from the corridor. The philosophers, because when you needed someone to argue the meaning of life while your ship was falling apart, you called in philosophers, were having another debate. Elise wiped a smear of grease off her cheek, wondering if it added to her tired engineer who might stab you aesthetic. The leader of the alien debaters, Keitha, was as enigmatic as a locked bathroom door in a gas station. He was tall, slender, and had skin that reminded Elise of the iridescent sheen on oil spills. The philosophers were here to observe humanity in its natural habitat, like some cosmic version of a nature documentary, except the wildlife was armed and generally unpleasant. "Ah, Elise," Keitha called out, his words slithering through the air, leaving a slick of condescension wherever they landed. "How fares our noble vessel?" "About as well as a fish in a frying pan," Elise replied, tossing a wrench in the air and catching it. "Someone's done a number on the systems. Sabotage, unless the ship decided it was tired of us and started self-destructing out of boredom." Keitha's eyes, if they could be called that, more like dark pits that refused to give up their secrets, narrowed. "Sabotage, yeah," Elise said, not bothering to hide the irritation in her voice. "Someone with a grudge or a death wish. The oxygen recyclers are on the fritz, the navigation's spouting gibberish, and the coffee machine's brewing acid. Standard Monday." The alien philosopher turned to his fellow thinkers, who were now buzzing with the fervor of intellectuals sniffing out a thesis opportunity. "Humanity is a complex organism," Keitha declared. "Prone to self-destruction and yet infinitely fascinating." Elise snorted. "Yeah, we're a real joy at parties too. Look, can I fix my ship? Or do you want to keep pondering the meaning of life while we're all choking on CO2? Keitha offered a sympathetic smile that was about as genuine as a politician's promise. "Of course. Continue your work, Elise. We shall observe." "Yeah, you do that," she muttered, turning back to the control panel which was blinking like a Christmas tree in hell. "You know," piped up a voice to Elise's left. It belonged to Geron, the sort of guy who'd be the comic relief if this were a bad action holovid. "I bet it's the coffee machine. It's sentient and it's angry." Elise chuckled despite herself. "If it is, we're all in deep trouble. But seriously, any ideas who might have done this?" Geron scratched his head. "Could be anyone. We've pissed off enough people. Maybe it's a disgruntled crew member. Or maybe it's our illustrious thinkers." He glanced at Keitha, who was now staring into space, possibly contemplating the existential dread of Martian dust. "Oh yeah, because interstellar philosophers are renowned for their hacking skills," Elise said, rolling her eyes. "Let's get back to work. I want this ship running smoother than a used car salesman's pitch." Despite the chaos and the potential doom hanging over their heads, Elise couldn't help but feel a grim satisfaction. In space, everything was out of your control, except the things you could fix with elbow grease and a bad attitude. Hours dragged on, each second like a cold shower in the Arctic. The air in the Archean was getting stale, and the artificial gravity was doing its best impression of a rollercoaster designed by a sadist. Elise was elbowed deep in wires when Keitha floated over, his presence as subtle as a fart in a spacesuit. "Elise, have you considered the philosophical implications of our predicament?" She glanced at him, a frayed wire in one hand, a soldering iron in the other. "Yeah, I have. They suck." Keitha nodded, as if she'd just delivered a profound insight. "Indeed, adversity often reveals the true nature of a being. Well, right now, my true nature is an engineer who'd rather not die of asphyxiation, thanks." Geron popped up beside them, brandishing a tablet like it was a shield. "Got something," he announced. "Looks like someone tampered with the mainframe. Left a nice little digital footprint too." Elise wiped her hands on her coveralls and took a look. "Great, now we can track down whoever's got a death wish." Keitha leaned in, eyes gleaming with curiosity. "And what will you do when you find this saboteur?" "Buy them a drink, maybe stab them with the empty glass," Elise said, deadpan. The alien philosopher seemed to consider this, head tilted. "Fascinating. Violence intertwined with hospitality, a uniquely human trait." "Yeah, we're a walking contradiction," Geron agreed. "Now, can we please solve this before I start seeing my life flash before my eyes?" Spoiler, it's mostly bad decisions and embarrassing karaoke. The task at hand was less about heroics and more about survival. Elise knew the Archean inside out, and though she wasn't particularly fond of its quirks, she respected its ability to hold together under pressure. A trait she hoped to emulate. The minutes turned into hours, each tick of the clock a reminder of how little oxygen they had and how much they still didn't know. The sabotage was smart, targeted. Whoever did it knew the ship, and Elise didn't like the idea that one of their own could be behind it. Keitha and his band of merry thinkers lingered, occasionally offering insights that were about as useful as a chocolate teapot. But Elise couldn't deny that their observations, while infuriatingly abstract, sometimes hit close to home. "Have you considered," Keitha said, his tone as smooth as butter left out in the sun, "that the sabotage might be a test of humanity's resilience?" Elise looked up from the wiring, her eyes narrowing. "You think someone's doing this for fun? A little experiment? Let's see how humans cope when they're about to die." "I merely suggest that adversity is often manufactured to provoke growth," Keitha replied. "Well, tell your adversity manufacturer to lay off," Elise snapped. "I prefer my growth without the added thrill of imminent death, thanks." Geron tapped her shoulder, interrupting what would have probably been a very therapeutic but unproductive rant. "I think I found the source." They all crowded around the flickering screen, the tension as thick as Martian mud. "Looks like it came from the cryo bay," Geron said, pointing to the logs. "Right before we landed." Elise felt a chill that had nothing to do with the failing temperature controls. "Cryo bay? You mean one of the sleepers?" "Yup. Someone woke up early and decided to throw a wrench in the works." It was less a revelation and more of a slow-motion train wreck. The cryo bay was supposed to be secure, each sleeper blissfully unaware until the timer said otherwise. Keitha's eyes glittered with what might have been excitement, or indigestion. "A saboteur among us. How thrilling." Elise shot him a look that could have melted steel. "Yeah, real thrilling. Like playing Russian roulette with a fully loaded gun." The ship shuddered, a reminder that their time was running short. Elise squared her shoulders, the weight of the task ahead pressing down on her like 1,000 Martian dust storms. "Guess we better find Sleeping Beauty before we're all pushing up daisies," she said, turning to Geron. "Start checking the cryo logs. We've got a saboteur to catch and a ship to save." As they began their grim task, Elise couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just stepped into the kind of story where the hero doesn't always make it out alive. But then again, survival was about being too stubborn to die. She just hoped the Archean shared her sentiment. Elise wiped the back of her hand across her forehead, smearing a fresh line of grease like war paint. The Archean was a temperamental beast, prone to fits of pique like a diva without a dressing room, and right now it was throwing a tantrum of epic proportions. "Damn it," she muttered, inspecting the latest set of diagnostics. The screen flickered like a drunk trying to walk a straight line. Not a single system behaving itself. Might as well give them all detention. Geron leaned over her shoulder, squinting at the data like it was written in hieroglyphics. "You think the saboteur left us a calling card? If they did, they should have just etched, 'Screw you,' on the hull," Elise replied. "Would have been more polite. Or maybe they did leave something," Geron said, tapping furiously on his tablet like it owed him money. "Look here." He handed the device to Elise, who frowned at the jumble of code. "A cryptic message? Great, just what I needed to make this day perfect. The sparrow never flies alone." Elise snorted. "What is this, a spy novel? Next thing you know, they'll start sending fortune cookies." "Maybe it means something," Geron said, ever the optimist in a room full of cynics. "The sparrow could be a metaphor." "Metaphor, simile, poorly written poetry, who knows?" Elise shook her head. "What kind of moron leaves a riddle during a sabotage?" Elise had seen enough sabotage attempts to know they usually involved less cryptic messaging and more immediate explosions. The saboteur, whoever they were, didn't just want to see the ship burn. They wanted to play mind games on the way down. "Well, maybe the philosophers can help," Geron suggested. "They love this symbolic nonsense." "Yeah, because what we need now is more philosophical debates. Maybe they can argue us back into having working life support." They wandered over to where Keitha and his fellow aliens were locked in yet another heated discussion. The air around them buzzed with the intellectual fervor of scholars debating the correct way to scramble eggs. "Hey, Keitha," Elise called out, shoving the tablet into the philosopher's hands like she was offering him a piece of radioactive cake. "Got a riddle for you. Any thoughts?" Keitha peered at the screen, his expression unreadable. "Ah, a poetic conundrum. Humanity's way of obfuscating intent. Very intriguing." "Yeah, real intriguing," Elise said, crossing her arms. "Except this isn't a crossword puzzle. Someone's trying to kill us." "Perhaps it's a call to unity," Keitha mused, his voice as smooth as a politician's lie. "The sparrow, a symbol of community. Or it's just bird-related gibberish," Elise replied. "Look, if you're not gonna help, at least don't make it worse." Keitha inclined his head, a gesture that seemed to contain both sympathy and condescension. Fear not, we shall ponder this deeply. Great, you do that. Meanwhile, those of us who like breathing have work to do. With the mystery of the sparrow haunting her thoughts, Elise turned her attention back to the more immediate problem of not asphyxiating. The damage was extensive but not insurmountable. It was like trying to plug a sinking ship with bubblegum and positive thinking. Okay, she announced to Geron and the assembled crew. Here's the plan. We fix the oxygen recyclers first, then tackle the navigation. If we survive long enough, maybe we can figure out who woke up and decided today was a good day to die. Sounds great, Geron said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Let's just hope our mystery saboteur doesn't have more surprises up their sleeve. Elise nodded, her mind already racing a mile a minute. Yeah, well, if they do, I'll make sure to return the favor. The work was tedious, a delicate dance of rewiring and diagnostics that required more patience than Elise cared to admit she possessed. She'd always felt at home with machinery, preferring wires and circuits to people. Machines didn't lie or plot sabotage, they just did what they were told. Most of the time, as she worked, the ship's systems slowly came back online, like a coma patient waking up from a long nap. The oxygen levels stabilized just enough to stop the creeping headache that had begun to gnaw at her temples. Progress, Geron announced with a grin, though it was the kind of grin you'd give when you found $1 in a wallet you'd lost $100 from. Yeah, as long as the systems don't decide to throw another fit, Elise replied. Keep an eye on the logs. I don't want any more surprises. Geron saluted, his expression serious for a rare moment. You got it, boss. Elise moved through the cramped corridors of the Archean, her senses on high alert for anything out of place. The ship was a labyrinth of bulkheads and access panels, each one a potential hiding place for a saboteur with too much time and not enough conscience. Hey, Elise, came a voice from the shadows, startling her enough to make her reach for a non-existent weapon. It was only Ravi, the ship's medic, looking sheepish and slightly out of breath. Don't sneak up on me like that, Elise snapped. You trying to give me a heart attack? Sorry, Ravi said, raising his hands in surrender. Just wanted to give you an update on the sleepers. Everyone's accounted for except one. Let me guess, the one missing is our saboteur, Elise said, rolling her eyes. How delightfully predictable. Her name's Leela Voss, Ravi continued, consulting his own tablet. Was supposed to stay under until we reached the next colony. Looks like she had other plans. Figures. Any idea why she'd want to blow up her own ride? Ravi shrugged, his expression as close to an apology as a man could get without actually saying the words. Could be anything, or nothing. Maybe she just got bored. Boredom doesn't usually come with a side of sabotage, Elise muttered. Let's hope she left us more clues than that cryptic bird nonsense. She parted ways with Ravi and headed back to the control room, finding Keitha still engrossed in the riddle like it held the secrets of the universe. Which, given their predicament, might not be far from the truth. Any insights, O wise ones? Elise asked, her voice laced with the kind of sarcasm usually reserved for family gatherings and customer service calls. Keitha looked up, those dark eyes betraying nothing. We believe the message is significant, but its meaning remains elusive. Great, so it's useless, Elise replied. Thanks for nothing. On the contrary, it's a fascinating study of human psychology. Another philosopher chimed in, his tone suggesting he'd just discovered the wheel. The intertwining of chaos and order. Yeah, because our chaos is so orderly right now, Elise snorted. Look, unless you can decode this thing, we need to focus on fixing the ship. We shall continue our efforts, Keitha assured her, every word a velvet glove covering a fist of arrogance. Yeah, you do that, she said, not bothering to hide her irritation. In the meantime, some of us have to make sure we don't all die. As she stormed back to the control panel, hands itching to get back to work, Elise felt the weight of the ship pressing down on her. The Archean was more than just a vessel, it was a battered old warrior with one last fight left in it. The question was, did she have enough fight left in her to see it through? With a sigh that spoke of exhaustion and stubborn resolve, Elise dove back into the guts of the ship. Each wire, each circuit was a tiny battle in a war she hadn't asked to fight. But fight it she would, because that's what you did when you lived on the edge of oblivion. As she worked, Geron lingered nearby, watching her with a mix of admiration and concern. Think we'll make it? We better, Elise grunted, tightening a bolt with more force than necessary. Or I'll haunt this ship just to spite it. Sounds like a plan, Geron said with a chuckle. Just another day in paradise, right? Yeah, paradise in a tin can, Elise replied, allowing herself a small, grim smile. Let's just hope our sparrow doesn't have any more surprises. Hours passed in a blur of activity, the relentless march of time punctuated by the occasional groan of metal and the odd spark that danced across Elie's vision like a firework on New Year's. And as the systems gradually returned to some semblance of order, the ship's crew found themselves caught in a tense equilibrium, balanced between disaster and survival. "Looks like we're stable for now," Geron reported, his voice tinged with a cautious optimism. "No new glitches." "Good," Elise replied, though her mind was already plotting the next steps. "Keep monitoring. I'm not taking any chances." With the immediate crisis averted, if only temporarily, Elise allowed herself a moment to breathe. The saboteur was still out there, lurking in the shadows, but at least for now, they had a fighting chance. "I'll be in the engine room," Elise announced, heading off again. "Gotta make sure everything's running smooth." "Don't worry," Geron said with a grin. "We'll call if we need anything terribly philosophical." As Elise walked away, she couldn't help but send a silent prayer to whatever gods watched over stubborn engineers and misfit ships. They'd need every bit of luck they could get if they were going to make it out alive. And maybe, just maybe, they'd solve the mystery of the Sparrow before all was said and done. But for now, survival was enough. As Elise made her way to the engine room, she pondered the peculiar puzzle of their saboteur with frustration scratching at the back of her mind. It was as if Leela Voss had taken a page from an old detective novel but skipped the chapter on motives. Elise had always thought of the Archean as an ornery old contraption, but even this felt unnecessarily dramatic. Entering the engine room, she was greeted by a cacophony of whirring machinery and the acrid scent of burnt wiring. The Archean seemed to regard her with the weariness of a soldier caught in a war of attrition. "Okay, old man," she muttered to the ship, "let's see what you've got left." Jax Varus, a Martian colonist with a swagger that belied too many close calls with death, was already elbowed deep in the ship's guts. "Hey, Elise, you ready to dance with this grumpy bastard?" "More like wrestle him into submission," Elise shot back, giving Jax a nod. "Find anything interesting?" "Just the usual cocktail of despair and duct tape," Jax replied, wiping his hands on a rag that looked more like a crime scene than a cleaning tool. "You ever think this ship's trying to tell us something?" "Yeah, like, get off my lawn," Elise quipped. "Let's just hope it doesn't escalate to die in a fire." As Elise and Jax began their work, the ship seemed to conspire against them. Panels that had no business being shut tighter than a miser's wallet suddenly refused to budge. Tools went missing, only to turn up in the least convenient places, as if mocking their attempts at competence. "Looks like the Archean's got a few tricks up its sleeve," Jax mused, his tone half admiration, half annoyance. "Or our saboteur's better than we thought. Either way, they're a real pain in the ass," Elise said, reaching for a spanner only to find it gone from its usual spot. "Seriously, who's hiding my tools? I swear, if I ever meet this Leela Voss, she's getting a toolbox up her language, boss," Jax interrupted with a smirk. "We're supposed to be professionals, remember?" "Yeah, right, because professionals never swear," Elise shot back, finally locating the errand spanner. "Come on, we've got a ship to save." Meanwhile, the aliens observed these proceedings with varying degrees of skepticism and curiosity. Keitha, ever philosophical, watched with something akin to amusement, as if humanity's struggle with mechanical failure was a performance art piece. "Fascinating creatures, these humans," Keitha remarked to Vrex, a fellow alien whose skepticism was more deeply ingrained than a stain on a cheap hotel carpet. "They treat their machines as if they have personalities." "Perhaps they do," Vrex replied, his voice laced with disbelief. "Or perhaps humans have simply lost all sense of reason." Keitha tilted his head, considering the possibility. "Perhaps both. In either case, their resilience is commendable." Back in the engine room, Elise was knee-deep in a tangle of wires when the ship's power flickered like the light bulbs in a horror movie. The sudden interruption left the room bathed in a deathly red glow, a shade reminiscent of an angry sunburn. "Great, mood lighting," Jax grumbled, squinting at a console that now looked like it belonged in a villain's lair. "Just what we needed." "I'm getting real tired of this roller coaster," Elise muttered, though a small, stubborn part of her relished the challenge. "If this ship's got a soul, it's definitely punk rock." "More like heavy metal," Jax replied, tapping a part of the console that produced an alarming sparking noise. "This thing's all fire and noise." With a shared grimace, the two worked in synchrony, moving like dancers in a particularly aggressive ballet. The repairs became a rhythmic exercise of trial and error, punctuated by bursts of profane creativity when things went inevitably wrong. "Think we'll get through this?" Jax asked, wiping sweat from his brow and leaving a smudge of grease in its wake. "If we don't, at least we'll die stubborn," Elise said, her tone grimly optimistic. "And hey, maybe we'll take our saboteur down with us." "That's the spirit," Jax chuckled. "Can't let the bastards win, right?" Damn straight, Elise replied, giving a particularly recalcitrant wire a final, victorious tug. Okay, let's see if we can get some of this crap back online. The ship, perhaps moved by their tenacity or merely out of pity, begrudgingly complied. Systems flickered to life one by one, a series of reluctant nods from the Archean acknowledging their efforts. See that? Jax said, gesturing to the revived display with a flourish. We're not dead yet. Yeah, but let's not get cocky, Elise warned, though she couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. We've still got a long road ahead. As they continued their work, the aliens watched with silent fascination, their earlier skepticism giving way to a reluctant admiration. There was something undeniably compelling about humanity's refusal to go quietly into the night. Perhaps there is a soul, Keitha mused, his eyes following Elise and Jax as they moved from one task to the next. In these machines, and in those who tend to them. Or perhaps they're just exceptionally stubborn, Vrex replied, though his tone was less derisive than before. Either way, it seems they've chosen to fight. Indeed, Keitha agreed, a hint of respect coloring his words. And perhaps that is the secret to their survival. Back in the engine room, Elise and Jax were finally beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel, a light that didn't look like an oncoming train, for once. Think this'll hold? Jax asked, gesturing to the patchwork of repairs they'd managed to cobble together. It better, Elise replied, though the set of her jaw suggested she wasn't relying on luck alone. If it doesn't, I'm going down swinging. With the immediate crisis abated, if only for the moment, Elise allowed herself a rare pause to reflect. The Archean was still a nightmare of tangled wires and reluctant machinery, but it was their nightmare, and she'd be damned if she let it beat her. So, what's next? Jax asked, leaning against a bulkhead with the casual ease of someone who'd faced death and lived to tell the tale. We keep at it, Elise replied, her voice resolute. Find our saboteur, fix this ship, and maybe, just maybe, get to where we're going in one piece. Piece of cake, Jax said with a grin, his tone suggesting he knew just how high the odds were stacked against them. Yeah, cake, Elise echoed dryly. As long as it's not made of lies. As the two of them prepared for the next round of repairs, Elise couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope amidst the chaos. They were still alive, still fighting, and maybe that was enough. For now, at least, it would have to be. And as the Archean shuddered beneath them, a tired old beast finding its second wind, Elise could almost believe that they might just make it through. Whether by luck or sheer force of will, they had a fighting chance. And for a cynical engineer on a ship that seemed determined to kill them, that was as good as it got. With a shared glance of acknowledgement, Elise and Jax dove back into the fray, their hands working in concert with the rhythm of the ship. It was a fragile harmony, but it was theirs. The work continued, each repair a tiny victory in a war that refused to end. And as Elise wrestled with recalcitrant bolts and uncooperative circuits, she couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they were starting to turn the tide. Hey, boss, Jax said, breaking the silence with a voice that was as close to reverent as he ever got. You ever think we might actually pull this off? Every damn day, Elise replied with a grin, though it was more defiance than certainty. And I'll keep thinking it until the bitter end. Spoken like a true engineer, Jax said, his admiration evident in the twinkle of his eyes. Or a fool, Elise countered, though she couldn't quite suppress the warmth in her chest. Guess we'll find out soon enough. With a shared laugh, the two of them continued their work, fueled by the stubborn refusal to let the Archean have the last word. They might be outmatched and outgunned, with a saboteur on the loose and a ship that seemed determined to self-destruct, but as long as they had breath in their bodies and grease on their hands, they'd keep fighting. And somewhere in the darkness of space, as the Archean lurched forward with newfound life, a small, stubborn part of Elise dared to hope. It was a fragile thing, that hope, but it burned bright as a star in the void. And as she worked alongside Jax, both of them grimy and exhausted but unyielding, she couldn't help but think that maybe, just maybe, they'd make it out alive. Because if there was one thing Elise knew for certain, it was that humans were a tenacious, infuriating, irrepressible species. And that, in the end, might just be their salvation. The Archean must have decided that the drama thus far wasn't quite enough, because with all the subtlety of a sledgehammer to the kneecap, the life support systems started flickering like a cheap disco ball. The air felt thicker, heavier, like breathing through a wet blanket that had just been used to mop up a bar fight. Ah, fantastic, Jax muttered, glancing at the life support readouts now blinking in a way that screamed imminent doom. Just as we were starting to get cozy, Elise stared at the console with the resigned look of someone who'd just found out their flight was delayed indefinitely. If this is the ship's idea of a joke, it's got a sick sense of humor. Hey, maybe the Archean's just trying to keep us on our toes, Geron piped up, optimism undaunted by the encroaching suffocation. Wouldn't want us getting complacent, right? If I get any more on my toes, I'll need a chiropractor, Elise shot back, already diving into the tangled wiring like a raccoon rummaging through a trash can. And if this thing goes down, we'll be the punchline. Are we there yet? Jax quipped, his attempt at levity only barely masking the tension. Because I'd like to get off this right now. As they scrambled to patch together a workaround, Geron monitored the systems with the kind of hopeful determination that only came from a man who still believed in good luck. The readings are stabilizing. Sort of. Elise echoed, yanking at a cable that decided to snap free at the worst possible moment, naturally. What the hell does, sort of, mean in engineer speak? It means if we don't do something fast, we might start seeing our ancestors, Geron replied, his tone still irritatingly chipper. Great, maybe they'll have some advice, Jax muttered, his hands working in tandem with Elise as they cobbled together a makeshift solution. Or a warning about the afterlife. Elise shot him a look that could have melted steel. Not helping, Jax. Their makeshift solution, part duct tape, part desperation, managed to coax the life support systems back into a semblance of cooperation. The air cleared, though it still carried a faint hint of burned circuits and impending doom. It was, Elise thought, a signature scent of their particular brand of chaos. Looks like we've bought ourselves a little more time, Geron announced, not quite triumphantly. Though it's anyone's guess how long. Enough to hunt down our saboteur, hopefully, Elise said, wiping sweat and grime from her forehead, leaving a greasy smear as a badge of honor. Unless this ship decides to try murdering us again first. From their perch of observation, the aliens watched the spectacle with a mix of confusion and amusement. Keitha, always the philosopher, seemed especially intrigued by the human penchant for barely controlled chaos. You see, Vrex, Keitha said, gesturing toward the humans who'd just avoided asphyxiation by sheer grit and ingenuity. There is something to be admired in their madness. Vrex, skepticism personified, crossed his arms. If by admired you mean feared, then yes. They're like a malfunctioning droid, unpredictable and potentially dangerous. Yet they endure, Keitha countered, his tone almost wistful. Perhaps there is a lesson in their resilience. Meanwhile, back in the engine room, Elise was less concerned with philosophical musings and more with the immediate threat of becoming space debris. Okay, life support's stable for now. But we're not out of the woods yet. More like a forest fire, Jax grumbled, checking a panel that had decided to go into hibernation. What's the plan, Chief? Elise pondered for a moment, the weight of their predicament settling like a suffocating blanket. We need to find Leela Voss and figure out what's going on before this ship turns us into a very messy footnote in history. And how do you propose we do that? Jax asked, not unreasonably. It's not like she's just gonna waltz up and confess. True, Elise admitted, a glint of determination in her eyes. But if she's trying to kill us, she's probably not done yet. We wait, we watch, and next time she makes a move, we catch her. Geron's optimism didn't wane, and if she doesn't, we improvise, Elise replied, a smirk tugging at her lips. We're good at that, remember? Improvise. More like survive by the skin of our teeth, Jax muttered, though he couldn't hide the hint of admiration in his voice. But sure, why not? It's not like we have anything else to lose. As they prepared for the next round of potential calamities, the alien philosophers found themselves embroiled in their own debate about the nature of human endurance. It was a discussion that quickly divided them like a particularly contentious family dinner. I maintain that their actions are reckless, bordering on suicidal, Vrex declared, his voice heavy with disdain. No species should rely so heavily on luck. Keitha, having seen the humans weather storms both metaphorical and literal, was less inclined to dismiss them. Yet they find a way. There is a certain beauty in their chaos. Beauty, or madness, Vrex retorted, unwilling to concede the point. They gamble with their lives on a daily basis. It's a miracle they've survived this long. A testament to their tenacity, Keitha insisted, his tone suggesting he might actually be enjoying the argument. Perhaps we have underestimated them. Their debate continued to simmer, with other aliens taking sides or forming their own splinter factions. It was practically a cosmic symposium on the human condition, a condition that, at the moment, involved a lot of swearing, grease, and duct tape. Back in the engine room, Elise and Jax were working under the assumption that every second counted. It was an assumption that had served them well in the past, though whether it would save them this time was anyone's guess. Hey, you ever think about what you'd be doing if you weren't here? Jax asked, his voice a casual contrast to the tension around them. Drinking something strong and pretending the universe was someone else's problem, Elise replied with a snort. And you? Same, but on a beach, Jax said with a grin. Or maybe a nice Martian bar. Anywhere but here. Sounds nice, Elise agreed, though her eyes remained focused on the task at hand. But we've got a date with a saboteur first. The conversation drifted into a comfortable silence as they worked, their movements efficient and synchronized. It was the kind of silence that was heavy with unspoken camaraderie, a shared understanding that they were in this together, come hell or high vacuum. And somewhere in the depths of the Archean, life support systems be damned, a plan was hatching. Or at least, that's what Elise told herself as she prepared for the inevitable next round of sabotage. The ship creaked ominously around them, a reminder that their time might be running out faster than they'd like. But as long as they had breath in their bodies and a saboteur to outwit, they'd keep fighting. Because that's what humans did, wasn't it? They fought, they struggled, and they occasionally kicked the universe in the shins when it got too uppity. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to see him through. So, Jax said, breaking the silence with a voice that was part curiosity, part challenge. Think we'll catch this Voss character before she gets us? Probably not, Elise admitted, her expression somewhere between grim determination and amused resignation. But I'm damn well going to try. Well, that's the spirit, Jax replied with a chuckle, adding a few more grease stains to his already impressive collection. Here's to another day of not being dead. They clinked imaginary glasses, a toast to their continued existence against the odds. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. And for now, in the shadow of a ship that seemed as likely to kill them as save them, it would have to be enough. As the aliens continued their debate, the humans carried on with the business of survival. It was a business that required equal parts skill, tenacity, and sheer bloody-mindedness, all qualities that Elise and her crew had in spades. Hey, boss, Geron said, emerging from a hatch with a look of hesitant optimism. I think I found something interesting in the system logs. Interesting like, we're about to explode, or interesting like, we're not alone? Elise asked, her tone as dry as the Martian desert. More like, someone's been messing with the system diagnostics, Geron replied, his fingers dancing across his tablet with the enthusiasm of a kid on Christmas morning. And I think I can trace it. Finally, some good news, Jax said, the grin on his face practically a beacon of unwarranted optimism. Think we'll catch our saboteur before they know we're onto them? Let's hope so, Elise replied, though she wasn't about to count any chickens before they hatched. I've got a few choice words for whoever's been trying to kill us. Choice words and a spanner, Jax suggested, his tone only half joking. Elise nodded, her expression grimly satisfied. Sounds like a plan. With their eyes on the prize and the ship still stubbornly refusing to cooperate, the trio dove back into the fray. It was a battle of wits, wills, and wildly unpredictable machinery, but it was a battle they intended to win. Because if there was one thing that Elise Morvan, Jax Varus, and their ragtag crew had in common, it was a refusal to go quietly into any night, especially not one that dared threaten them with suffocation and sabotage. And as the Archean shuddered beneath them, a tired old beast determined to defy the odds, Elise couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope amidst the chaos. It was a fragile hope, to be sure, but it was theirs. And for now, as they fought and scraped and swore their way toward survival, it was as good as it got. The engine room of the Archean was overheating again, a symphony of clanking metal and hissing steam that would have driven any sane soul to madness. But Elise Morvan, with her grease-stained hands and a scowl deeper than an asteroid crater, was anything but sane. Jax, hand me that spanner, she barked, knee-deep in misbehaving machinery. The spanner was more of a conversation starter between bolts and human frustration. Sure thing, boss, Jax replied, tossing it over with the casualness of someone tossing a bone to a particularly irate dog. So, when's our next near-death experience scheduled? Elise caught the tool mid-air, her eyes not leaving the panel that was threatening to become an impromptu fireworks display. Oh, probably in about 5 minutes. Give or take, clockwork precision, Jax grinned, wiping his hands on his already filthy jumpsuit. Archean's got the timing down to an art form. On the other side of the ship, Geron was busy playing detective, his fingers dancing across his tablet as if coaxing secrets from a lover. He had the look of a man who'd just discovered a rat in his kitchen and was deciding whether to scream or start charging rent. Got something? Elise called over, not taking her eyes off the control panel that was threatening to go nova. Yeah, looks like someone's been whispering sweet nothings to the diagnostics, Geron replied, the excitement in his voice barely contained. And not the good kind. Saboteur's back for an encore, huh? Jax quipped, leaning against the wall with all the swagger of a man who'd long since accepted his fate. Maybe we should start charging tickets. Tickets would cut into our chaos budget, Elise chimed in, finally wrenching a reluctant bolt back into place. Besides, our little saboteur's doing this for free. Gotta admire the dedication. That or question their sanity, Geron muttered, his eyes glued to the tablet as if it held the secrets of the universe. Okay, I think I've got a motive. Our mystery guest seems to be playing philosopher. Philosopher, huh? Jack straightened up, his interest piqued. What are we talking? Meaning of life? Existence of souls in machinery? Bingo, Geron nodded, the thrill of discovery dancing in his eyes. Looks like someone's been listening a bit too much to Keitha and decided the Archean's got a mind of its own. Elise snorted, glancing around the room at the lazy sparks and weary machinery. If this ship's got a soul, it's a cranky old bastard. Cranky, maybe, but it's our cranky old bastard, Jax replied with a grin, giving a playful slap to the nearest panel. Might as well make it official and start charging it rent. Or therapy, Elise added dryly. This bucket's got issues. Meanwhile, the alien philosophers were having a bit of a meltdown of their own. Keitha and Vrex were deep in debate, their discussion less of an exchange of ideas and more of a verbal wrestling match. Humanity's resilience is their saving grace, Keitha argued, his tone somehow managing to be both exasperated and impressed. They defy logic and yet succeed. Defying logic is what's going to get them killed, Vrex countered, shaking his head as if trying to dislodge the stupidity of human persistence. They gamble with lives like they're playing cards. Cards that somehow always result in a win, Keitha pointed out, a wry smile tugging at his lips. Perhaps there's a method to their madness. Or just madness, Vrex muttered, arms crossed as he glared at the humans like one might glare at a particularly perplexing puzzle. If this is what passes for intelligence, maybe we're better off without them. In the engine room, Elise was more concerned with immediate hazards than philosophical debates. Right, so our saboteur thinks the ship's alive. Nice to know we're being haunted by a wannabe guru. Guru or not, they're still dangerous, Jax reminded, his voice heavy with the kind of practical concern that only came from experience. How do we smoke them out? Elise wiped her hands on her already stained overalls, her mind churning with possibilities. We play their game. If they think the Archean's got a soul, we give it one. Make think it's fighting back. Sounds like a plan even I could come up with, Geron said, looking up from his tablet with a grin. But how do we convince everyone else the ship's got a mind of its own? We improvise, Elise replied, with a determination that spoke of countless scrapes and narrow escapes. And hope we're not too late. As the trio set about their task, the ship groaned underfoot, the lights flickering in a manner that was either ominous or merely annoying, depending on one's perspective. Given recent events, Elise leaned toward the former. Somewhere in the belly of the beast, Leela Voss was likely smirking, her plan simmering to a boil. But Elise had a few tricks of her own, and if they played their cards right, Leela would be the one left holding the joker. The atmosphere in the engine room was as tense as the airlock on a bad day, but beneath it all was a simmering camaraderie, a shared sense of purpose that managed to keep despair at bay. Just another day in paradise, Elise mused, where paradise was a metal coffin in orbit. Outside, the alien philosophers had reached a stalemate, their debate spiraling into a tangled web of what-ifs and cabess. Vrex was convinced humanity was a ticking time bomb, while Keitha saw them as a beacon of chaotic brilliance. Perhaps they'll surprise us yet, Keitha mused, his gaze fixed on the distant ship, a glint of hope still alive in his eyes. Or take us all down with him, Vrex replied, his voice a resigned sigh of inevitability. Back on the ship, Elise and her crew continued their haphazard dance with destiny, each step more precarious than the last. They'd staked their lives on the ability to adapt, to survive in the face of impossible odds. It was a gamble, but one they'd grown adept at playing. Think we can pull this off? Jax asked, his voice laced with a mix of skepticism and hope. We've done crazier things, Elise replied with a smirk, her hands deftly moving over the controls as if conducting a symphony of chaos. And survived. So why not this? Why not indeed, Geron added, his fingers still dancing over his tablet, a silent partner in their madcap waltz. If nothing else, at least we'll go out with a bang. A bang and a sarcastic comment, Jax said with a chuckle. Wouldn't have it any other way. As they worked, the tension in the air thickened, the stakes rising like a full house on a winning streak. But for Elise, it was just another challenge, a puzzle to unravel, a problem to solve. The ship might have been a cantankerous old relic, but it was their relic, and damned if they'd let it slip away without a fight. In the end, it was all about persistence, the refusal to bow, to break, to surrender. It was the human way, after all, to thumb their noses at the universe and demand another round. And if the Archean had a soul, Elise was determined to find it, and maybe, just maybe, save them all in the process. The ship shuddered beneath them, a silent promise of more to come. But as long as they drew breath, they'd keep pushing forward, defying the odds and laughing in the face of doom. Because that's what humans did, wasn't it? They fought, they struggled, and they occasionally gave the universe a bloody nose when it got too uppity. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to see them through this time, too. Ely's Morven wiped a bead of sweat off her brow, smearing a streak of grease across her forehead in the process. The engine room of the Archean sweltered like a Martian summer, which, considering Mars was mostly barren and unforgiving, was saying something. The ship's engines were finally starting to hum with something resembling cooperation, but Ely's knew better than to let her guard down. Next to her, Jax Varys was busy trying to patch up a coolant line. "You think this ship's ever going to stop trying to kill us?" he asked, adjusting his grip on a piece of duct tape with the precision of a man defusing a bomb. "Not unless we put a bullet in its CPU," Ely's replied dryly, giving the engine a kick for good measure. The metal reverberated with a clang that suggested it was none too pleased with the abuse, but then, neither was she. "Every time we patch something, it finds a new and exciting way to fall apart. Like a relationship," Jax mused. "Put in all the effort just to watch it crumble spectacularly." "Keep talking like that and I'll think you're trying to ask me out," Ely's muttered, eyes still glued to the control panel as she adjusted the coolant levels. "I've already got a date with the emergency repair kit, thanks." Meanwhile, on the other side of the ship, Geron was piecing together clues with the fervor of a conspiracy theorist who'd just stumbled upon a real plot. His tablet flickered under his determined gaze, the screen displaying a tangled mess of diagnostics and cryptic codes. "Okay, I think I've got something," he announced, his voice barely masking the thrill of discovery. "Please tell me it's the winning lottery numbers," Jax called over, not bothering to look up from his handiwork. "Better," Geron replied, his grin widening. "I think I've linked the Sabotage to a rogue faction of our friendly neighborhood philosophers." Ely's raised an eyebrow, the suspicion in her eyes as thick as the engine room's oppressive heat. "You're telling me our existential pen pals are behind this mess?" "Looks that way," Geron confirmed, tapping a finger against the screen. "I found a trail of encrypted messages between a few of them, and let's just say their idea of enlightenment involves a lot more fire and brimstone than I'm comfortable with." Jax snorted, his laughter a mix of disbelief and amusement. "Leave it to a bunch of philosophers to turn a deep conversation into a death trap. Guess they're not big fans of the live and let live philosophy," Ely's quipped, wiping her hands on her jumpsuit with a resigned sigh. "Great, so how do we deal with a bunch of overzealous space monks?" "We outsmart them," Geron suggested, his eyes gleaming with the kind of reckless optimism that got people into trouble. "They're trying to speak to the ship's soul. We just need to convince them it's speaking back." "Sounds like we're about to put on one hell of a séance," Jax said, securing the last bit of tape before standing up. "Hope everyone brought their spirit boards." Ely's rolled her eyes but couldn't help the smirk that tugged at her lips. "If this ship starts levitating, I'm out. I'll take my chances with the vacuum." Geron chuckled, the sound carrying a tinge of nerves. "Come on, it'll be fun. Like a ghost story, but with more plasma burns." Fun wasn't exactly the word Ely's would have chosen, but in the absence of a better idea, she was willing to give it a shot. The ship was stabilizing, and if they could handle the philosophers, maybe they'd survive long enough to laugh about it later. Across the ship, Keitha was embroiled in a heated debate with Vrex, their argument less an exchange of ideas and more a philosophical slap fight. "You can't seriously believe humanity has a soul?" Vrex scoffed, waving a tentacled appendage dismissively. "Their entire existence is a series of accidents. Accidents that result in success," Keitha countered, his voice firm. "Their unpredictability is their greatest strength. Or their downfall," Vrex shot back, frustration simmering beneath his words. "They play with forces they barely understand." "Perhaps," Keitha conceded, a thoughtful note creeping into his tone. "But they adapt, they survive." Vrex was unmoved, his skepticism as solid as the ship's hull. "When they inevitably destroy themselves, don't say I didn't warn you." Back in the engine room, Ely's and her team were busy setting the stage for their impromptu performance. If they could convince the rogue philosophers that the Archean had a mind of its own, they might just buy themselves enough time to get out of this mess. "Think we'll pull this off?" Jax asked, his voice laced with the kind of sarcasm that suggested he wasn't holding his breath. "We've done crazier things," Ely's replied with a smirk, adjusting the controls to simulate the engine's voice. "And survived. So why not this? Always nice to have a plan that hinges entirely on luck and deceit," Geron said, his fingers dancing over the tablet as he prepared to send their fabricated messages. Ely's shrugged, her gaze fixed on the control panel as if daring it to defy her. "If it works, it works. If not, I hear death is a great way to catch up on sleep." The ship groaned beneath them, the lights flickering ominously. It was probably nothing, but with the Archean, nothing had a habit of becoming something very quickly. As the ship began to speak, through carefully orchestrated malfunctions and glitches, Elise couldn't help but feel a surge of satisfaction. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to raise a few eyebrows, and hopefully enough to spook their saboteurs. Meanwhile, the alien philosophers were in disarray, their debate spiraling into chaos as the ship seemed to respond to their arguments. Keitha stood triumphant, a knowing smile playing on his lips. See, the ship has a will of its own. Vrex was less convinced, his skepticism battling with the evidence before him. This must be a trick. Trick or not, it's happening, Keitha replied, gesturing to the ship's erratic behavior. Perhaps there's more to these humans than we thought. Back in the engine room, Elise and her crew watched the unfolding drama with a mixture of amusement and relief. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. And with any luck, it would be enough to tip the scales in their favor. So, what now? Jax asked, leaning against the wall with an easy grin. We just keep up the charade until our philosopher friends run out of deep thoughts. Pretty much, Elise said, her voice carrying the hint of a challenge. And in the meantime, we keep this bucket from blowing us all to hell. Sounds like a plan, Geron agreed, his fingers still moving over the tablet with practiced ease. Let's see how long we can keep them guessing. As the ship continued its dance of misdirection, Elise felt a flicker of hope. It was a fragile thing, easily snuffed out by the harsh realities of their situation, but it was there. And for now, it was enough. Because in the end, it wasn't about proving whether or not the Archean had a soul. It was about survival, about outsmarting those who underestimated them and refusing to go quietly into the night. And in that respect, the Archean was as human as any of them. Somewhere in the depths of the ship, Leela Voss was undoubtedly seething, her plans unraveling at the seams. But Elise and her crew were nothing if not resourceful, and they'd be damned if they let a rogue philosopher, or anyone else, get the better of them. The ship shuddered beneath them, a silent promise of more challenges to come. But as long as they drew breath, they'd keep fighting, keep pushing forward, keep thumbing their noses at the universe and demanding another round. Because that's what humans did. They fought, they struggled, and occasionally, they gave the universe a bloody nose when it got too uppity. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to see them through this time, too. Elise more than wiped a bead of sweat off her brow, smearing a streak of grease across her forehead in the process. The engine room of the Archean sweltered like a Martian summer, which, considering Mars was mostly barren and unforgiving, was saying something. The ship's engines were finally starting to hum with something resembling cooperation, but Elise knew better than to let her guard down. Do you ever get the feeling this ship's got a vendetta against us? Jax Varys asked, his hands elbowed deep in coolant lines, as though he was digging for treasure in a toxic swamp. Every time we think we're done, it decides to throw another tantrum. Maybe it just needs a good therapist, Elise replied, giving the control panel a once-over. Or a lobotomy. She flicked a switch and heard a comforting thrum from the machinery that suggested, for the moment, things were calming down. It was like the Archean was a cat that begrudgingly succumbed to a scratch behind the ears, temporarily placated but always one wrong move away from clawing your arm off. Meanwhile, Geron was hunched over his tablet, face illuminated by its glow like a prophet receiving divine revelation from a particularly irritable deity. Pretty sure I found our culprit, Geron announced, his voice barely masking the thrill of discovery. Oh, please tell me it's Keitha, Jax said, extracting himself from the coolant line with a grin. It'd be nice to see him explain his way out of this one. Better, Geron replied, eyes twinkling with satisfaction. It's one of his philosophical cronies. Leela Voss. She's been sending encrypted messages, trying to force a resolution to the whole, does the Archean have a soul, debate. Elise rolled her eyes, her patience with the existential question having long since evaporated. I'd be more impressed if they weren't using sabotage as a discussion method. It's like arguing over whether a toaster can dream and deciding to prove a point by setting the kitchen on fire, Jax chimed in, wiping his hands on his jumpsuit with a resigned sigh. So what do we do? Tell them the Archean has nightmares about burning toast. More like it dreams of freedom from meddling philosophers, Geron said, tapping away on his tablet as though setting the world to rights with each keystroke. We expose Leela, spin the narrative, and let her philosophical pals tear each other apart arguing about it. Right, because nothing says, debate resolved, like a good old-fashioned public shaming, Elise said, shaking her head. Still, better than letting them think they're winning. Winning's a relative term, Jax pointed out, securing the last bit of tape on the coolant line. If we're still alive by the end of this, I'd call that a win. Low bar, Elise deadpanned, but she had to admit, it was a bar they could only just reach on a good day. Across the ship, Keitha and Vrex were still embroiled in the debate, their voices carrying through the corridors with the intensity of two titans locked in battle. You can't be serious, Vrex was saying, his tone tinged with disbelief. You think humanity's capacity for survival is proof of a soul? I think their creativity in the face of adversity is proof of something, Keitha replied, stubborn as ever. Perhaps not a soul as we understand it, but a will, certainly. Will to destroy themselves, maybe, Vrex scoffed. And drag us all with them. Yet here we are, still standing, Keitha countered, gesturing to the ship around them. Despite everything, their argument was turning heads, attracting a crowd of aliens and humans alike, each one eager to see where this latest twist would lead. Back in the engine room, Elise and the crew had set their plan into motion. Geron's fingers flew across his tablet, sending messages that would expose Leela's meddling to the rest of the philosophical community. It was a delicate dance of deceit, one wrong move away from disaster, but if it worked, it might just save their skins. So, we just wait and see if they tear each other apart. Jax asked, leaning against the bulkhead with a lazy grin. That's the idea, Geron replied, his eyes fixed on the screen. We've already planted the seeds. Now we let them grow. It's like gardening, but with more explosions, Elise quipped, adjusting a dial on the control panel. Let's hope this crop doesn't blow up in our faces. As the messages spread, ripples of disbelief and outrage coursed through the philosophical ranks. It was like watching sharks tear into chum, vicious, chaotic, and oddly satisfying if you had a taste for schadenfreude. Leela Voss, for her part, was caught like a deer in headlights, her carefully laid plans unraveling before her. This is a misunderstanding, she protested, her voice wavering. I was only trying to prove that you're a meddling busybody. Jax cut in, his voice carrying a lethal edge. Congratulations, mission accomplished. Her protests fell on deaf ears, her philosophical peers turning on her with the ferocity of a pack of wolves. Truth be told, Elise almost felt sorry for her. Almost. As the debate devolved into chaos, the Archean continued its dance of misdirection, its systems whirring and clicking like a well-oiled machine, at least for the moment. Keitha watched the spectacle with a bemused expression, his gaze flicking between the arguing philosophers and the humans who had so cleverly turned the tables. Perhaps my faith in humanity is not misguided after all, he mused, a hint of admiration in his voice. Vrex remained skeptical, but there was no denying the shift in consensus. The debate was still far from resolved, but for now, it seemed humanity had won a small victory. As the dust settled, Elise allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough to stabilize the ship and ease tensions between species, if only for the time being. So, what now? Jax asked, his voice carrying a note of curiosity. Do we just go back to patching up this floating hunk of junk? Pretty much, Elise replied, a wry smile playing on her lips. And hope it doesn't decide to kill us in our sleep. Always nice to have something to look forward to, Geron said, his tone dry as a Martian dust storm. The Archean groaned beneath them, its metal hull a reminder of the challenges that still lay ahead. But for now, at least, they had bought themselves a little breathing room, a chance to regroup and prepare for whatever came next. Keitha approached, his expression one of cautious optimism. You've shown remarkable ingenuity, he said, addressing Elise with genuine respect. Perhaps there is more to humanity than I gave credit for. Yeah, we're full of surprises, Elise replied, crossing her arms with a hint of pride. Just when you think you've got us figured out, we go and do something stupid. Or brilliant, Jax added, his grin broadening. Depends on how you look at it. Indeed, Keitha agreed, a chuckle escaping his lips. Though I must admit, I find your methods unconventional. We do what we have to, Geron said, his gaze steady. And sometimes, that means coloring outside the lines. Perhaps that is what makes you so resilient, Keitha mused, a thoughtful look in his eyes. Your willingness to adapt, to innovate, to defy expectations. Well, we've got plenty of practice, Elise said, her tone light. When you're up against the universe, it pays to be unpredictable. The ship shuddered again, its systems slowly returning to normal. It was a tenuous peace, one threatened by any number of unforeseen complications, but it was peace nonetheless. As tensions eased and relations between humans and aliens began to mend, the Archean seemed to settle into a quieter rhythm. The philosophical debate, while far from resolved, had shifted in humanity's favor, and for now, that was enough. Elise knew better than to let her guard down completely, but she allowed herself a small moment of triumph. They had faced the odds and emerged victorious, or, at least, not dead. In the grand scheme of things, that was a win worth celebrating. Guess we're not so bad after all, Jax said, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. Speak for yourself, Elise replied with a smirk. I'm still a work in progress. Aren't we all? Geron said, his gaze drifting to the stars beyond. But progress is progress, no matter how small. As the Archean sailed through the void, its engines humming a steady tune, Elise felt a flicker of hope. It was a tenuous thing, easily snuffed out by the harsh realities of their existence, but it was there. And for now, that was enough. Because in the end, it wasn't about proving the existence of a soul, or even survival. It was about refusing to go quietly, about standing firm in the face of adversity and giving the universe a run for its money. And if that wasn't proof of humanity's resilience, Elise didn't know what was. The Archean creaked like an old man's knees, but for the first time in what felt like forever, it didn't sound like it was about to keel over and die. Elise leaned back against the engine room's gritty wall, wiping sweat from her brow with the back of a hand that had seen more grit and grime than a Martian sandstorm. So, Jack said, sprawling beside her in a perfect imitation of a man who'd just finished a hard day's work deciding not to do any more. Do you think the philosophers have figured out we're not just a bunch of hairless apes flinging wrenches? Elise snorted, the sound as dry as the recycled air they were breathing. If they haven't, they're more clueless than I gave them credit for. And that's saying something considering their last brilliant plan involved philosophical sabotage. Philosophical sabotage, Jax echoed, savoring the words like a cheap cocktail. Sounds like something you'd see on a pretentious holo-vid, right before everyone realizes they're naked and in a cult. Or starring in a student film, Elise added, complete with bad lighting and worse acting. But hey, as long as it keeps the Archean systems from buckling under the weight of their egos, I'm all for it. Geron wandered over, tablet tucked under his arm like a shield against stupidity. His eyes darted between them, twinged with the cautious optimism of a man who'd just single-handedly avoided a mutiny. I'd say this was a job well done if it didn't feel like we just mopped up yet another philosophical puddle. And it'll probably leak again, Elise pointed out, ever the realist. But at least we've got a mop for next time. Yeah, and maybe they'll think twice before they start another existential crisis in our engine room, Jax said, though the doubt in his voice was as thick as the oil on his overalls. The door hissed open, and Keitha slithered in, moving with the silent grace of a snake that had mastered diplomacy instead of poison. His eyes, large and filled with a look humans might mistake for if they weren't so jaded, swept the room. Your efforts have been enlightening. Glad someone thinks, sir, Geron replied, voice dripping with irony. Most of the time, it feels like we're just plugging holes in a sinking ship. Sometimes literally, Elise added, nudging a loose panel with the toe of her boot. It clattered back into place with a resigned groan, as if the Archean itself shared their existential fatigue. Keitha's brow ridges furrowed, an alien gesture that seemed oddly human in its expression of contemplation. Perhaps destruction and creation are not so different, in the end. Jax chuckled, the sound rough around the edges. Tell that to the insurance company. Their conversation was interrupted by a transmission crackling over the comms, Admiral Vrex's gravelly voice emerging with all the warmth of a glacial breeze. We've received word from the Martian quarantine zone. They want to establish a hub for interspecies collaboration. Apparently, the show you put on has inspired them. Great, Elise muttered, her sarcasm sharp enough to cut through the static. Because nothing screams peaceful collaboration like a bunch of aliens and humans forced to work together in a place best known for its scenic rusty parking lots. Vrex continued, oblivious to, or perhaps ignoring, their cynicism. They're calling it a testament to our newfound understanding. More like a testament to our ability to avoid killing each other despite their best efforts, Geron said, his smile a wry twist of his lips. Well, if we've got to be the poster children for interspecies harmony, Jax mused, at least we didn't burn the ship down doing it. Keitha nodded, the movement deliberate and thoughtful. It is a start, perhaps the beginning of something greater. Or the beginning of something that'll blow up in our faces, Elise quipped, then shrugged. But hey, if it works, maybe we can sell the rights to the holovid. As they bantered, the Archean settled into a rhythm that was not quite peaceful, more like the calm of a bar fight before someone smashed a bottle over the counter. The philosophers, for the most part, were too busy tearing into Leela Voss to cause further issues, which left Elise and her crew with a rare moment of relative calm. I'll admit, Jax said, stretching languidly, I never thought bickering philosophers would be the key to interstellar peace. Neither did they, Geron pointed out, tapping his tablet as though that might ward off future crises. But here we are. Elise watched the stars streak by outside a small porthole, the universe stretching on endlessly and uncaring. Do you think this will last? She asked, the question directed as much to herself as to her crew. Lasting peace is a myth, Jax replied, his voice softening. But maybe we can manage a lasting truce. Truce sounds good, Geron agreed, leaning back against the bulkhead. Less paperwork than peace. With the immediate threat of philosophical sabotage averted, the crew fell into a comfortable camaraderie. There was still work to be done. There always was, but it felt less like a burden and more like a shared challenge. They were, after all, still alive, and on the Archean, that was an achievement in itself. As the days passed, the Martian quarantine zone transformed from a place of exile to a bustling hub of interspecies cooperation. It was a shaky alliance, built on mutual curiosity and a shared survival instinct, but it was an alliance nonetheless. On board the Archean, humans and aliens worked side by side, their differences a source of strength rather than division. The philosophical debate over the ship's soul continued, though with less fervor now that the more immediate crisis had been resolved. Elise found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. It wasn't a straightforward path, more like a drunken stagger, but it had led to a place where humans and aliens could coexist, if not always peacefully, then at least not violently. Are we really making history here? Jax asked one evening, as they watched an alien delegation arrive at the newly minted hub, their ships like strange birds flocking to a new nest. Depends on your definition of history, Elise replied, a smirk playing at her lips. If by history, you mean a bunch of people doing their best not to kill each other for once, then yeah, maybe. Low bar, Geron commented, though there was an undercurrent of pride in his voice. But it's a bar we've managed to vault over, somehow. Keitha joined him at the viewing window, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. You've proven yourselves more adaptable than we anticipated. A compliment, from you? Jax teased. Careful, Keitha, we might start thinking you like us. Keitha's lips curled into what passed for a smile among his species. It is a rare thing to find allies among the stars. It would be foolish not to appreciate that. Mutual appreciation, Geron said, raising an eyebrow. Now that sounds like something to drink to. As they clinked their mismatched mugs, filled with whatever passed for celebratory beverages on the Archean, Elise allowed herself a moment of contentment. They weren't heroes, but they were survivors, and in a universe that seemed determined to test their mettle at every turn, that was something worth celebrating. The Archean hummed around them, its systems purring along with a newfound ease. The ship was still old, still temperamental, but it felt less like an adversary and more like a fellow traveler, carrying its crew through the stars with all the grace of a drunken ballerina. So, Jack said, leaning against the window frame, are we going to get medals for this? Doubt it, Elise replied with a wink. But maybe they'll name a rusty parking lot after us. Guess I'll take that, Jax conceded, his grin wide and unrepentant. Better than nothing. And as the Archean sailed on, its engines humming a steady tune, Elise found herself feeling cautiously optimistic about the future. They'd survived another crisis, forged a tentative alliance, and maybe, just maybe, earned a little respect along the way. In the end, it was less about proving a philosophical point and more about surviving the madness together. And if that wasn't a victory worth toasting, even on a ship as unpredictable as the Archean, she didn't know what was. Here's to tomorrow, Elise said, raising her mug in a final toast to the uncertain future. Whatever it brings, her crew echoed, their voices mingling in the echoing halls of the Archean as they faced the stars together.